very important in terms of shaping the minds of young people. Whoever controls your educational system determines what you know, and what you know determines how you think and how you act. Whoever controls the media determines your perception of self, determines what are legitimate and illegitimate modes of communication and behavior. And as we know all too well by looking at the media, whether it's television, radio, print media, film, or videos, we continue to be presented in ways that sap our humanity and show us as people who are undesirable, criminals, hustlers, and people that no one in their sane mind would want to identify with. So we have to regain control of the systems which influence our thoughts and our behavior, our educational systems, our media systems, and the means of employment.
Word more is a Roman word for black. The word black is an English word for black. African is an African word. It comes from the Afri people who lived in what was then Tunisia. They now live in places like Niger, Mali, and Senegal, and they call themselves Afri. That was one of the many ethnic names. The Romans' acronym for land is Ka. It is in the Roman literature that we see the word for the first time, that I'm going to Afri land, I'm going to Africa, where the Morush lives, where the blacks live. That's all they were saying. So if people ain't studying Roman literature, and they're going to have a conversation with somebody named Leo Africanus, first of all, that person named Leo Africanus, that's not the name at all. There was a Roman general who defeated Hannibal, and you take the name of the people you defeat. So he defeated the Africans, so he took the name and said, I'm the Africanus, because I've conquered you and I've conquered your land. His brother conquered Asia and took the name Asia. Is Asia a European word? No. His brother called himself Asia because he conquered a certain portion of Asia. So
I do not even use the term African American. I use the term Africans because that's what we are. We're Africans in America. There's nothing American about us. Our history has only been a history of struggle in America. We are the only ethnic group in America who have to shed our blood to make reform. To get the vote, we must shed our blood. To get our children to school, we must shed our blood. To get on the bus and sit where we want, we must shed our blood. To even get in a filthy 5 and 10 cent store, we must shed our blood. So I don't see how we could be American. We're Africans in America struggling against American capitalism. And only until it's destroyed will we enjoy the rights that everyone else is speaking of.
Well, as long as I'm in my right mind, I'm committed to the African liberation struggle. However, I do not view it as a struggle. It said it's the African liberation movement. Because many times when brothers and sisters get to talking about we involved in the struggle, they make it hard for themselves and anybody else who may be interested in it. It is a happy thing that we do, those who are participating in it. We chose that this is the road we would go rather than be manipulated and controlled by something or someone else. Now that's a happy choice. That's a choice a lot of people don't even know they have. So now the fact that you made that choice, you must be a happy warrior. It must be a joyful task. You fight better when you're happy. Even when it comes to the point where you have to take an enemy's head off, do it with a smile.
Do you see, just like every other
between
act,
people of blacks and whites.
every act is a political act, because when people relate, they are always relating on the basis of power. Do you see what I'm saying? Whether they are aware of that or not. You can never get away from that. And so even when people of different colors are relating, the question of power is brought into play. For example, the French, in terms of maintaining colonial domination in Africa, Arnold Toynbee has written about this, that they made it a policy, if the black man, you send him to the, the African who's in the colony, you give him a high school education and send him on to the university in Paris. He comes back and he says, all right, now I'm a Frenchman and I want to be free. I'm educated. I know as much as a colonizer. I want to be free. That you can cool him out by giving him a white woman. Do you see what I'm saying? And we see certain phenomena going on in the society today where black men who are married to white women are being given positions that black men who are not married to white women are not being given. Why? Because the white system perceives that that is a safe individual. Why? Because it is not only compromised in bed, but he is psychologically compromised. I mean, anytime you get in bed with somebody, sex is a very profound human act. and it has extreme psychological implications that spread into your, you know, what do you do in the area of economics, what do you do in the area of entertainment.
Though, that,
in every one of those treaties that they set up with the Indians, they put an inclusion in there saying this, that if you were to cooperate with us and be able to help us maintain the slavery system we set up in this country, you know, and we will reward you and compensate you. We'll give you clothing, we'll give you food, we'll give you weapons, you know, and we'll even call you civilized if you will help us maintain slavery. Every treaty contained a clause to help Indians to shut down black folk. Slavery could never have existed in this country and been maintained without the full participation of the American tribes. That's why they started calling them civilized rock, because they began to say, you quit hunting in the woods and running wild and get yourself some land and get yourself some slaves. So Indians became slave hunters, slave traders, and in the final analysis, all civilized tribes, the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, and Seminole Indians, they all fought with the South to maintain slavery. And so therefore, and they got benefits from it.
Say blacks hate blacks. It's not just a myth. Why we do not have the same respect for members of our race as we do for some other, especially the white race. And that we were told, quite to the contrary, that we were from a land of savages, of cannibals. And except by the grace of God and the white man, we would have been a lost people. So we should be on our knees forever praying and thanking God that we were brought, even in slavery, to this land to escape the horrors of Africa. And this was brought in and drilled into us generation after generation.
The political term and the term which indicates our self-awareness at this juncture in history, and I think we really need it. We need to really bathe in blackness for a while, but I wish we'd get the bath over with and go on to something a little more important, because black in itself is not an ethnic term. Black tells you how you look, but it don't tell you who you are. We are essentially an African people. Wherever we live on this earth, we're essentially an African people. And we relate to the millions of African people throughout the world, including the uncounted millions of Africans in Asia. The word Afro-American or African-American would probably be more appropriate and more honest and more in keeping with what we actually are, because all of us are not positively, physically, real jet black. And so the argument now sometimes is between the supernationalists and the mild nationalists and blacker than thou, when blackness is a state of mind, a state of attitude, a state of approach to things that can exist in almost any of us, including from the blonde black person to the jet black.
I was kept in a room, isolated for something like 4 or 5 days. I was beaten, tortured. It was a hellish experience. No one was permitted to see me. My aunt, who is also my lawyer, Evelyn Williams, had to get a court order for her and my mother and my sister to come and see me. I was in prison altogether 6.5 years. I spent more than 2.5 years in solitary confinement. Much of that was in men's prisons. In other words, I was the only woman. Even though they say that there are no political prisoners in the United States, I was kept in solitary confinement, kept in men's prisons because of my political beliefs. So you figure that one out. What was prison? Prison was hell. It was a new kind of plantation. I feel like a maroon woman. I feel like an escaped slave, because what I saw in the United States in those prisons was slavery. It was black people with chains in cells. It was just poor people, just stepped on and smashed. I'll never forget what I saw. I'll never forget what I've lived through. I'll never forget what my people have lived through.
I mentioned that today. How many jobs are created by black music?
All right.
Yeah, look at the whole structure of the music industry. From promoters to manufacturers of the records and the tapes and what have you, to the whole entertainment field, to the sellers of music in the stores, you know what we say, the Tower Records and the other great sellers of records and music and so forth, advertising that uses our music and all these things. How many thousands of jobs are we creating as people? We're creating them, but they have them. You see? We sing the music, they sell it. We sing the music, they market it. We sing the music, they promote it. You see? We sing the music, they produce great conglomerates like Sony, CBS Music, creating all kinds of jobs. We're creating tremendous jobs for a lot of people. How many jobs do we create just buying from Koreans? Buying from other ethnic groups out here? How many people are we creating employment for in terms of our spending habits as a people and our consumption habits as a people? How many jobs are we creating going to jail?
Our children are maiming each other. Our children are on drugs. And here you are talking about ancient African history. Why is this relevant? How do you respond to that?
It's one of the major pieces. It's not the only piece. You can't say that if someone takes a course in chematology that they will stop drugs tomorrow. But you can say that if a group of people has no sense of being a part of the historical world, that is, if we see ourselves as mere spectators, that we just sat on the sidelines as the march of humanity went by, that has an effect on how you live your life. And one way we know this is that we watch what happens when children and adults learn this information about African people. The difference in attitude, the difference in self-esteem, self-concept, self-image, you can almost see those things change before your very eyes.
What are you seeing? What have you seen?
First, when we speak of culture in terms of a European definition, we always tend to make a superficial definition of it as the creative art, singing, dancing, poetry, and so forth. But the nationalists, Pan-African nationalists, view culture as a total value system. It is a total way of looking at the world, a total way of interpreting the world, a total way of living in the world. So that we define culture totally as a total value system, also a moral system, a moral construct, and institutions that are set up to maintain that way of looking at the world and to develop that way of looking at the world. The fall of African peoples, that is, the putting of African peoples into slavery, meant to a large extent the destruction, through warfare, through slavery, of their culture, that is, their way of living, and the subjugation, imposing of another culture on them, as the brother here says, through superior power. When we speak now of a means of defeating white supremacy, which is what we call it, which is a combination of white power and white racism in combination, we say that the only way this can be done is by developing first an alternative value system and then alternative institutions to maintain and develop that value system.
So I always start with a test question, just to get a temperature, just a temperature guide on where everybody is. So I ask people if they understand what racism is. So I'm going to ask this audience, do you understand what racism is? Show of hands. Okay. See, this is the professor in me. I can't help it. So I'm going to ask you this question. Can white people be racist? Show of hands. Okay. Can black people be racist? Show of hands. Excellent. Show of hands. Okay, thank you. Now what I want you to do is, we're going to basically do a little research I want you to consider two columns. The first column is called white racism. And I want you to name some of the things that are representative of white racism. In other words, how does white racism adversely impact the lives of black people? What are some of those ways that white racism adversely impacts? Housing, education, jobs, health care, profiling as it relates to justice, criminal justice, right. Okay, so if I were to continue to ask you, we would have a nice little list there, okay. And that's okay. Now we're going to move to the next category. How does black racism adversely impact the lives of white people? Let me get clear.
Well, when I went to saw the professor and saw what they were doing, it was right down the alley of what I wanted to do.
What were they doing?
They were digging, they were examining and looking at the reliefs in the various buildings. I asked to join in with them. And I was honestly told that they were sorry that they didn't take people of my color. And the exact words. And I said, well, there would be nothing wrong I was doing. I was willing to compromise and I wouldn't get into the way. And he finally said, well, all right, you could stay and go around what we do, but you can't sleep along with us. You would have to sleep away from us.
Tell me some of the names that you were referred to as.
I was called Snow White.
By this professor?
By professor and the other students. At the time when they want to relate to me, they say Snow White or Black Boy. There were so many other names, Black Sambo. And they would come out and say it whenever they felt like it. Sometimes they would say African, and that's supposed to be an insulting word. To call me an African, I was supposed to feel bad, but that one I was very happy. When they called me African, I was happy that day.
Did you?
All fossils that have been found outside of Africa have been found under close analysis to be much more recent than those found in Africa.
Et aucun autre continent que l'Afrique ne possède la série complète des 6 spécimens dont je vous ai parlé.
And no other continent in the world has the complete series of fossils indicating the 6 specimens that I spoke of before.
Je vous ai dit que les 3 premiers ne sont jamais sortis de l'Afrique. Ça veut dire que ni en Europe, ni en Asie, encore moins en Amérique, on ne trouve ces 3 premiers spécimens, qui sont le début de l'humanité.
These 3 specimens, which represent the very beginnings of mankind, cannot be found in Europe, they cannot be found in Asia, and of course cannot be found in America. They never left Africa. The complete set remains in Africa.
Donc, autant de preuves accumulées qui aujourd'hui donnent la certitude que l'homme est né en Afrique.
The accumulation then of the best information now makes it very clear that man had its origins in Africa.
Ici en Amérique, vous n'avez que le spécimen sapiens sapiens. On n'a pas trouvé dans l'état actuel de la science, sur toute l'étendue de l'Amérique, depuis la Terre de Feu jusqu'en Alaska, il n'y a qu'un homme moderne. Et l'Amérique a été peuplée par le détroit de Bering à la fin de la dernière glaciation dont j'ai parlé. Donc il n'existe qu'un seul spécimen, le dernier ici en Amérique.
The only specimen, as we've seen on the slide, that appears in America is that of Homo sapiens sapien. America was peopled through the Bering Straits at the end of the final glaciation, and it is for that reason that we find only Homo sapiens sapien in America.
Well, one of our great TV personalities, Brother Gil Noble,
yes,
he had the program on ABC Like It Is.
Yes.
And whenever he would have me on, or Dr. Clarke or Dr. Ben, some of the great scholars, he would ask us, well, when did you get these ideas? When did this consciousness become? And so I used to tell him, Gil, all of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, how could it be all of you? I said, my pablum, growing up in Newark, New Jersey, in our village in Newark, which was the Roseville district, my pablum was not Little Red Riding Hood, Jack and the Beanstalk, and all of these Cinderella. It was Booker T, W.E.B., and Marcus Garvey. Right. In other words, Booker T. Washington had a philosophy of self-development, put your buckets down where you are, and grow and develop. W.E.B. Du Bois was one of our great scholars, and he said we really need a talented tenth of people who've mastered the knowledge and can be our leaders. And then Marcus Garvey, inspired from about Africa, came from the Caribbean with a view that no matter what language we spoke and no matter what island or what state we were from, we were African peoples, the original peoples. And so,
brothers and sisters, humanism. If we look at it, you're the human being. You're the human being. You gave morality to the world. You gave ethics to the world. You gave spirituality, the notion even if they haven't accepted it, or nature won't allow them to receive it. You gave the notion of spirituality to the world. You gave religion to the world. You did. Before you, there were none. After you, there'll be no more. If you find a thing doing the same thing in every time zone, on every landmass, throughout the annals of time, you find it doing the same thing, then that should let you know that it cannot change.
So the next morning, and it turned out to be good because the trip is about to get full. The next morning there's a delegation to meet me. There's a delegation of Muslims, there's a delegation of Buddhists, there's a delegation of Hindus, and there's a delegation of people that are called tribals. This is a tribal person. And these are the clearest example of what the first people in India look like. In India you have three components of black people historically. One, the first people over there are black, Africans. And then number two, you have those who developed the civilization. They're also the same thing. And then you have those of us who, like many other parts of the world, like us, were caught up in the slave experience and came to India voluntarily. Slaves didn't come from Africa. You know the rest. Africans were captured in Africa and enslaved and taken all over the world. If you look at those three things, that's what counts for the diffusion or the dispersal, what some people refer to as the diaspora of black people all over the world. India has all of those. And they were all there in that room to meet me. And they were delighted. They were probably more excited about meeting me than I was about meeting them. Because few people over there, even the educated elite, have ever met a black person from outside India.
You know, we're caught up in a mind game. And as long as they have us reactionary, we can never be proactionary.
Yes.
Listen, it wouldn't have made a difference if Hillary Clinton became the president. Nope. It wouldn't have made a difference to me if Barack Obama had been given a third term. It wouldn't have made a difference to me who is in the presidency. If we're on our A game doing what we're supposed to do, and this is what I say to us as a people. Harriet Tubman is my hero.
She's mine too. Yes.
I pray to sister every morning that I get up. And this is what I say. Do you think that Harriet Tubman ever worried about who was president of the United States when she was on the Underground Railroad?
Not at all.
Do you ever think she ever thought that somebody in the White House was going to make her job a little bit easier?
No.
Then that's what I say to us. That's how I think. It doesn't make a difference who's there. I'm going to do this. This is my thing. My question is, what is your thing? What is your contribution? And have no fear for atomic energy, because atomic energy is them. As you can see, there's explosions all over the place.
People of the Nile Valley. And this is the reason why when we speak of Egypt, as it's called today, as our ancestors called it Kemet, ancient Kemet, that literally means black, okay, where in fact the term chemistry equally came from. We look and see that this is where we can find many of these spiritual stories, but Egypt has been locked away. Most black folks don't even know that Egypt is in Africa, all right? And this is due to the egoism, you know, and one has to ask, why is this? The secret lies there. We have a rich repository of spiritual knowledge. African people, we as an African people have always been a very spiritual people. We can't start time with a Western time. We've got to go back. So this is to not to believe, but to think about, okay, the rich heritage that African people, okay, brought to the world, that's incorporated into many of the ideas that we have today. And I think that we would open up a whole true spiritual consciousness, above all, starting to see our own divinity in opening to what our ancestors wrote for countless thousands of years.
Were Africans the first Americans? 3D reconstruction of 10,000-year-old caveman's face controversially challenges long-held theories about the first settlers. So what the Mail is reporting on is new research into ancient America shows that the very first people there did not look like the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans. The very first people there were actually black people. And an even older find was found in Brazil. And a woman's skeleton was found, and it was reconstructed, and they call this woman Luzia. And they've subsequently reconstructed the images where you can see the hair, and the hair is interesting, and the hair tells a powerful story. And again, this hair needs to be seen. So we've already established then, Africa is the cradle of the human race. The very first people in the Americas were black people. So that raises some obvious questions. What do we know about the first inhabitants of northern?
And here today we live in the shadow of the world, making apologies for ourselves, when we have given so much to the rest of the world. I would have given so much if 20, 30 years ago I knew about this. I lived in such anguish in my 20s, so ashamed of having African blood, as so many of us have had to grow up. Making apologies for being in a world that we did not belong, a world controlled by others. And that was alright because one can live in captivity. That doesn't matter so much, but to know that one's mind is imprisoned. To know that even when you allow people freedom, the oppression of the mind is so great, their ignorance of themselves and of what they have done and what they belong to, their connections are so shattered that they feel like non-people. That is why we go back to this history, because it makes us whole again.
I believe that his voice connected with so many people because he was of the people. Tupac spent a lot of time in the community. His growth between his mothers and my own involvement in the Black Liberation Movement, his development, early childhood development. We worked in the South Bronx. His mother worked at Bronx Legal Services, which was providing legal services for tenants who were being displaced, who were getting very negative housing. I worked at Lincoln Detox, which was an anti-drug program, and it was in the days where the community programs were very important and very massively involved. You know, with people involved, it was a people type thing. He learned a lot from the people, not from what was said by the people. He hung around with dope fiends, he hung around with gangsters, he hung around with oppressed people, he hung around with struggled people. People were struggling for things. He listened to the meetings. He was at all the meetings. You know, he was hanging. He was a part of that struggle as a young child as he developed. And so he knew the people. And so as his creativity evolved, he was able to articulate those feelings, and had his own feelings by suffering, by having food sometimes, and not living in the best home sometimes, and trying to catch a gypsy cab in Harlem or in the Bronx. You know, he did everything we did. You know, the rain, the snow, no heat, the heat. You know, so he experienced what people experience, and a lot of us cannot articulate what we experience. A lot of times we're glad that someone else articulates it. So when Pop presents a piece, whether it be poetry or a rap or a song or just speak, people identify that because we all don't have that ability to represent our pains and our joys and our frustrations.
My position is that the black woman's disrespect and rebellion against the leadership and the authority of the black man is a direct cause of the breakdown in our black family structure. And of course, there are many black people who consider those fighting words, because as black women, we have never been subject to the kind of examination that our men have been subject to since we have been here. We have been somewhat protected and shielded from any kind of critiquing about our personal behavior, whereas our men have always been up for examination. The book is not an attack on black women. I have never said that all black women do everything that I list in my book. None of us have lived long enough to do everything that I list in the book, but most of us do some of the things that I've listed in my book. And I do say that it is not because of generalizations that we are all victimized by some of the negative patterns of behavior in the book, but the book just represents our collective contribution. This is some of everything that we have done, or that we do daily, that contributes to the breakup of our relationship, the destruction of our man, and the failure of our children to be able to function. They did not tell us that all of that, being my own person and I'm independent, would lead to separation, loneliness, celibacy, and lesbianism. They didn't tell us that if you give up the man, you're going to take one of these things and it's worse and it will destroy your nation. They didn't give us that information. They made us think that it was some kind of glorified position to brag about the fact that I got my own job, my own credit card, my own car, so I don't need no man. I don't even know how we got that mixed up. Ain't none of that got nothing to do with being with no man.
The Black Panther Party felt that we would quickly become a national organization when blacks across the country saw what we were doing in Oakland by driving out what we call the oppressive army of police and controlling our community, the institutions in the community. We felt that the government's next move would be to bring in a National Guard to recapture these institutions, and this would connect us to the international movement of the workers' movement, the international proletarian movement, such as what's happening in Cuba, and we're very impressed by the Cuban Revolution. And at the time of the creation of the Black Panther Party, I was introduced to Marxism, and I think I had read a book called the Materialism and Empirical Criticism, and by Ivy Lenin. And at that time, that it was pointed out that there are many contradictory social forces, and if you knew what to increase or decrease at a particular time, that you could cause a transformation. And so we were trying to increase the conflict that was already happening, and that was between the white racism, the police forces in the various communities, in the black communities in the country. And we felt that we would take the conflict to a so high a level that some change had to come.
African Americans, who are so-called Negro, one of the reasons that it is bad for us to continue to just refer to ourselves as so-called Negro, that's negative. When we say so-called Negro, that's pointing out what we aren't, but it isn't telling us what we are.